It physically sickens me to see you walk into this house wearing that uniform." A stack of grease-stained napkins slammed onto the table. My own mother stood there, pointing her finger right in my face in front of more than 20 guests. Her eyes grazed over me like I was a disease. "Look at your brother. Zach is teaching real men how to survive, and you, a tax-leeching secretary playing soldier. I'd rather say I don't have a daughter than admit you're this much of a disgrace." The shrill laughter of Zach and his buddies erupted. They gloated. They didn't know the burnt stench of JP-8 jet fuel that clung to my hair after every night mission. And they sure as hell didn't know what the classified call sign, Revenant 1, meant. I sat in dead silence, my hand gripping the beer can under the table until the aluminum crushed and drew blood. This stab wound was fired by the woman who gave birth to me. A fatal shot. But I wasn't going to die. But before I tell you why, that night was the only time in 3 decades they actually saw me, and who ultimately paid the heaviest price. Hit that like button, subscribe, and don't go anywhere. Because what I did next tore down the entire fake foundation this house worked so hard to build. The laughter hung in the heavy, humid air. It mixed with the greasy, foul smoke of overcooked hot dogs and cheap charcoal. I could feel the sweat prickling the back of my neck under the stiff collar of my service khakis. Zach leaned back in his rusted lawn chair. He was picking his teeth with a plastic fork, looking like he just won the lottery. My mother didn't miss a beat. She thrived on this. An audience. A stage to play the martyr. Evelyn dug her clawed, manicured hands into the depths of her knockoff designer purse. The metal hardware clanked. She pulled out a crisp white document. Thick paper. The legal kind. Shh. She slid it across the sticky, ketchup-stained wood of the picnic table. It stopped right next to my crushed beer can. I didn't even need to lean in to read the fine print. The bold block letters at the top screamed at me. Power of attorney. Financial release. "Sign it," she ordered. Her voice dropped that fake, syrupy pitch she always used for the neighbors. Now it was just raw demand. Zach's business is hitting a rough patch. He needs liquid capital to keep the lease on his training grounds. You're sitting on years of hazard pay over there in the Navy, hiding behind a desk. It's time you contributed to this family instead of hoarding a government paycheck. I'm giving you the chance to do the right thing. A bailout. She wanted my combat pay, the money I earned flying through anti-aircraft fire to save her golden boy's sinking ship. I didn't blink. I didn't reach for the cheap plastic pen she tossed on top of the contract. Instead, my eyes locked onto a glossy brochure sitting near a bowl of melting potato salad. Zachary Butler's Alpha Survival Tactics. The cover was a joke. It featured Zach decked out in pristine, unsoiled woodland camo. He was gripping a plastic airsoft AR-15, wearing a tactical vest that still had the factory creases pressed into the nylon. A weekend warrior charging suburban desk jockeys $500 a head to crawl through the mud in a local public park. He didn't know the first thing about survival. He just knew how to grift. My right index finger tapped against my thigh under the table. A silent, steady Morse code rhythm against my uniform trousers. Dash, dot, dash, dot. Target locked. The silence at the table stretched out, pulling tighter and tighter like a rusted winch. It grew thick, suffocating. The clinking of bottles and the murmur of conversation around the yard faded into a dull, flat hum. 20 pairs of eyes bored into me. Aunts, uncles, Zach's wannabe militia drinking buddies. They were all waiting for the prodigal, unloved daughter to cave. Waiting for me to break down, cry, and write the check just to buy a scrap of Evelyn's affection. Zach couldn't handle the quiet. It made him twitchy. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table with a smirk that didn't quite reach his dead, anxious eyes. Desperation leaked out of his pores, masking itself as arrogance. "Come on, Mish," he scoffed, using the childhood nickname I absolutely despised. "Your little paper-pushing gig on a ship doesn't compare to running a real, boots-on-the-ground enterprise. Be useful for once. Hand over the cash. I'll even cut you a 5% equity stake. Give you a taste of what it's like to actually build something instead of just living off the taxpayer dime." A muscle feathered in my jaw. I let out a slow, controlled breath through my nose. Equity in a bankrupt circus. He wanted to take the money I earned pulling 9G turns over hostile territory to pay off his maxed-out credit cards and loan sharks. The sheer audacity of it left a sharp, metallic taste of copper in my mouth. They really thought I was just a clerk. They really thought I was a spineless coward who would fold under a little social pressure. Don't let those who have never faced the storm tell you how to sail. General Mattis's words echoed in the back of my skull. Cold, sharp, absolute. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. Yelling means you've lost control. I reached out my hand steady and picked up his glossy survival flyer. I crushed it. My fist squeezed the tendons in my wrist, popping until the heavy paper compacted into a tight, hard ball. Without a word, I flicked my wrist. The paper bullet arced through the smoky air and landed dead center in the glowing orange coals of the Weber grill. It caught fire instantly. A burst of yellow flame followed by black toxic smoke curling up into the evening sky. I stood up. My metal chair scraped violently against the concrete patio, the harsh, grinding noise cutting through the silence. I looked down at Evelyn. I didn't see a mother. I saw a parasite. I swiped the back of my hand across the sticky wood, knocking the power of attorney straight off the table and into the dirt. My money is paid in blood, I said, my voice dropping to a dead flat register that carried no warmth, no hesitation. It's not going into your circus. I didn't wait for her jaw to drop. I didn't wait for Zach to stand up, puff out his chest, and play the tough guy. I turned my back on the yard, on the grease, on the family that viewed me as nothing more than a walking ATM. I walked straight toward the wooden gate, the rusted hinges whining as I pushed it open, heading down the sandy path toward the beach, into the cold, pitch-black night. Let them choke on their own smoke. The bass from the backyard stereo faded into the rhythmic, violent crashing of the Atlantic surf. The air out here was heavy. It tasted like salt and dead seaweed. I stood at the edge of the water, the wet sand soaking into the heavy leather of my service boots. My back was perfectly straight, a habit they drill into you at Annapolis and beat into you during flight school. Muscle memory. You do not slouch. You do not show weakness, not even to the ocean. I reached into my uniform pocket. My fingers brushed against a piece of thick, glossy cardstock I had swiped from the picnic table on my way out. Zachary Butler, Director of Operations. My other hand pulled out a solid brass Zippo. It was scuffed, dented at the hinge, and smelled faintly of raw, lighter fluid. Clink. The metal lid snapped open. The flint sparked sharply against the steel wheel. A jagged yellow flame punched a hole in the darkness. I held the edge of my brother's fake identity to the fire. The cheap laminate blistered instantly. It curled inward, turning pitch black before catching fire. I watched the word Alpha melt into a glowing ash. The wind ripped the burning embers from my hand, scattering them across the damp sand. Fake men. Fake wars. He paid a lot of good money for those. The voice came from over my right shoulder, deep, gravelly. Worn down by decades of screaming orders over the roar of Black Hawk helicopter rotors. I did not flinch. I did not turn around. I recognized that voice instantly. Colonel Roland Butler. Retired Navy SEAL. My uncle. The man who cast a shadow so large over this family that my brother spent his entire life trying to buy a flashlight bright enough to match it. Roland stepped up beside me. He smelled like expensive scotch and cheap sour cigars. He looked down at the blackened smear of ash near the toe of his leather loafer. A former Tier 1 operator, a man who had stared down foreign warlords, now standing shoulder to shoulder with the niece he routinely threw to the wolves. The silence between us stretched. It was not the comfortable silence of old combat veterans. It was the suffocating, heavy, dead air of a tactical standoff. He was waiting for me to yield, to show the belly. That is what the men in this family expected. Women serve the men. Successful women fund the failing men. You cannot just walk away from that table, Michelle. Roland finally spoke. He did not look at me. He stared out at the black water, his hands stuffed deep into the pockets of his slacks. Evelyn is your mother. Zach is your blood. He's in trouble. Real trouble. The kind of debt that brings men with baseball bats to your front door at 3 a.m. I kept my eyes locked on the horizon. Then he should buy a real rifle. Roland let out a heavy sigh. It sounded wet and exhausted. Do not do this. You have the hazard pay. You have the officer salary. You are sitting on cash you do not even use. Cut the check. Save the family name from public humiliation. I slowly turned my head. I looked at the man I used to worship. The square jaw was sagging. The broad shoulders were hunched. He was not a warrior right now. He was an enabler. A tired old man trying to sweep dirt under a rug to protect a boy who completely refused to learn how to be a man. My money, I said, keeping my voice dead flat, is not a band-aid for his incompetence. I earned every single dime in a cockpit. I will not hand it over to fund a paintball park. Roland turned to face me. The moonlight caught the sudden desperation in his eyes. He leaned in closer, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me. A tactic that might have worked 10 years ago. I am not asking you, Michelle. I am telling you, you will sign that paper. Because if you do not, I will tell Evelyn the truth. He paused. He wanted the next words to draw blood. I know what you did over there. I know exactly who you are. Revenant One. The wind seemed to completely stop. The name hung in the damp air like a live grenade with the pin pulled. He was using my classified call sign. A mission soaked in fire and blood. He was using the darkest, most traumatic night of my life as a crowbar to pry open my bank account for a con artist. The ultimate betrayal. Brotherhood traded for bloodline. Clink. I snapped the Zippo shut. The sharp crack of metal on metal echoed over the crashing waves like a gunshot. The flame died instantly. We were plunged back into the cold dark. I stared right through him. I saw every ounce of his cowardice laid bare on the beach. I know what it feels like to have the people who should protect you turn around and hold a knife to your throat. Have you ever been manipulated by a family member trying to protect the golden child? If you have, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment the word "survived" down below. Let me know I'm not the only one who had to fight my own blood. I stepped closer to Roland. I invaded his space, closing the gap until he had to crane his neck to look down at me. He actually took a half step back, the great Navy SEAL retreating from a fighter pilot. You want to talk about Revenant One? I whispered. My voice carried the cold mechanical hum of a jet engine spooling up for takeoff. Keep my secret, old man, or do not. I do not care anymore. But the next time this family reaches into my pocket or disrespects my uniform, I will not walk away. I will return fire. I did not wait for his response. The smell of burning jet fuel suddenly flooded my senses, washing away the salt and the smoke. The dark beach disappeared from my vision. The black sky cracked open, replaced by the screaming sirens of a missile lock. The blaring siren screamed, high-pitched, piercing right through the bone of my skull. It was not the cold ocean breeze hitting my face anymore. It was the suffocating 110-degree heat of a cramped F/A-18 cockpit over Mogadishu. The radar screen was a chaotic mess of hostile blips. Black oily smoke choked the horizon, smearing the lenses of my night vision goggles. My oxygen mask dug deep into my cheekbones, slick with my own sweat. Static hissed and popped through my helmet. A frantic, garbled mess of overlapping radio traffic. Then his voice cut through the noise. It was not the arrogant, booming voice of the uncle who ran the family barbecues. It was the ragged, terrified gasp of a dead man walking. Broken arrow, we are pinned in the courtyard. Heavy AAA, taking casualties. Anyone on this net, we are getting chewed up. Below me, a mud brick compound swarmed with technicals. Tracers lit up the pitch-black sky like a deadly neon fireworks show. Angry red hornets flying straight up, searching for my jet. I did not hesitate. I did not check with command. I slammed the throttle forward, pushed the stick down hard. The stick fought me, vibrating violently enough to rattle my teeth. The G-force hit me like an anvil. It crushed my chest against the 5-point harness. My flight suit inflated, squeezing my legs like a vice to keep the blood in my brain. I dove the Hornet straight into the teeth of the anti-aircraft grid. Warning lights flashed critical red across the dash. Pull up. Altitude. Pull up. I ignored the computer. I armed the payload. The targeting reticle locked onto the muzzle flashes below. I squeezed the trigger. The ground erupted into a blinding white flash. The explosion in my memory violently collapsed into the sound of breaking waves. The red warning lights faded back into the pale, cold moonlight reflecting off the Atlantic Ocean. I blinked. Just once. The freezing sea spray hit my face, washing the phantom smell of cordite out of my nose. Roland was still standing there in the wet sand. He was not the elite Tier 1 operator anymore. He was just an old man in a wrinkled, overpriced polo shirt. He avoided my eyes. He stared down at the scuffed toes of his loafers. I stared right through him. I looked at the man I almost died for. The man who sat at a picnic table 10 minutes ago and let my mother call me a tax-leeching secretary. I dropped that ordinance because it was my job, I said. My voice was stripped of any emotion. It was cold, rusted metal. You were a uniform on the ground. I was a uniform in the air. It was military protocol. Do not stand there and mistake my discipline for a family favor. He rubbed his thick, calloused hand over his face. The skin looked gray, sagging under the weight of his own hypocrisy. He took a slow drag from his cigar, but I saw it. His hand had a slight tremor. I wanted to tell them, Mish, he muttered. The lie hung in the heavy air, pathetic and weak. I wanted to stand up at Thanksgiving and tell the whole damn family what you did. But you know how your mother gets. He shook his head like he was the actual victim. If Evelyn found out her little girl saved a team of Navy SEALs, it would shatter her. She needs you to be the failure so she can feel like a savior to Zach. He swallowed hard. The cherry of his cigar glowed a dull red. And your brother. Christ, the kid is already fragile. He plays soldier on the weekends just to feel like a man. He's drowning in debt. If he knew his baby sister was Revenant 1. If he knew you were the real deal, he would probably put a gun in his mouth. I had to protect him. I had to keep the peace. The sheer audacity of it. I felt a muscle feather in my jaw. A decorated war hero bowing down to a suburban housewife and her deadbeat son. The ultimate betrayal. Out there in the dirt, I flew through anti-aircraft hellfire to cover his six. At home, he threw me under the bus to protect a 30-year-old man playing dress-up in the woods. Brotherhood traded for bloodline. My combat record deliberately buried so a con artist could keep his fragile ego intact. I did not scream. Screaming is for victims. I just looked at him. The disgust rising in the back of my throat tasted exactly like battery acid. He was a coward. Plain and simple. He wore the trident on his chest, but he left his spine in the desert. You protected a fraud, I said. My tone was flat, final. I took a deliberate step forward. The heavy soles of my service boots crunched loud against the sand. He instinctively shifted his weight, taking a half step out of my way. I walked past him, my shoulder brushing against his arm. I stopped just for a second. The faint, shrill sound of Zach's obnoxious laughter drifted over the wooden fence from the backyard. They were probably still passing around that power of attorney, waiting for me to come crawling back with a pen to sign away my hazard pay. Keep your silence, Roland. Take it to the grave for all I care. I did not look back at him. I kept my eyes locked on the dark path ahead leading back to the street where I parked my truck. But understand this. The next time this family reaches into my bank account, the next time they try to publicly humiliate me for their own sick amusement, I will not just walk away. I took another step. I will return fire. I left him standing alone in the dark, the embers of his cigar fading into nothing. 2 years. That is exactly 730 days. 730 days since Roland traded his honor to protect a fraud. 730 days of me wearing the gold oak leaf of a lieutenant commander on my collar while Evelyn continued to treat me like a defective ATM. I pushed open the heavy oak front door. The house smelled exactly the same. Over-buttered mashed potatoes, dry, overcooked turkey, cheap box wine spilt on the carpet. Thanksgiving in the Butler household. I did not announce my arrival. I stepped inside and immediately scanned the layout. Force of habit. Identify the exits. Identify the hostiles. The living room was loud. The TV was blaring a football game nobody was actually watching. Aunts and uncles were arguing over politics. My eyes bypassed all of it and locked onto the tight shadowed space near the pantry door. Zach. He was pressed hard against the drywall, holding his smartphone like it was a live grenade. The screen glowed bright, illuminating the sweat pooling on his forehead. The phone buzzed violently in his palm. A rapid, aggressive vibration. Debt collectors. Or worse. You do not sweat through your shirt on Thanksgiving unless you owe money to people who break knees for a living. His thumb jammed down on the red decline button. He let out a shaky, pathetic breath, wiped his damp forehead with the back of his sleeve, and plastered a fake, wide grin on his face. He spun around to walk into the dining room and almost ran right into me. He flinched, literally took a step back. I just stood there in my civilian clothes, dark jeans, heavy leather jacket, boots. No uniform today. But I still held my spine straight. He, on the other hand, looked like a wet rat. His fear instantly mutated into loud, obnoxious aggression, the defense mechanism of a coward. Well, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence, Zach bellowed, making sure his voice carried into the living room. The chatter died down, heads turned. He pointed a stubby finger at my plain jacket. What happened to the fancy gold stripes? The great paper-pushing major could not even afford to bring a pie. Or did the Navy finally go bankrupt paying you to sit at a desk? He let out a sharp, forced laugh. Nobody else laughed with him. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Evelyn walked out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a floral apron. She did not look at my face. She looked at my empty hands. Do not start with her, Zach. Evelyn sighed, playing the exhausted peacemaker. But the venom was right there, dripping from the corners of her mouth. Your sister has always been frugal. She hoards her government checks. She does not understand what it takes to run a real growing enterprise like you do. She just takes from the system. She does not build anything. A growing enterprise. I looked back at Zach. His hands were stuffed deep into his pockets, trying to hide the fact that they were trembling. His Alpha Survival Company was a rotting corpse. He was bleeding cash, dodging phone calls, drowning in his own lies. And Evelyn was standing right there, shoveling dirt over reality just to keep her golden boy on his plastic pedestal. I walked past both of them. I did not argue. Arguing gives them power. I walked straight to the dining table, picked up a heavy crystal pitcher, and poured myself a glass of ice water. The clinking of the ice cubes against the glass was the only sound in the dead quiet room. I took a slow sip. The water was freezing. It felt good on my dry throat. I set the glass down. I did not look at Evelyn. I did not look at Zach. I kept my eyes fixed on the condensation dripping down the crystal. My money. I said, my voice dropping an octave, settling into a low, lethal hum. Pays for crates of 5.56 ammunition. It pays for JP-8 jet fuel. It does not pay off gambling debts. And it sure as hell does not bail out fake men wearing tactical gear they bought on Amazon. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of quiet that rings in your ears. I saw Zach's jaw clench tight. The blood drained completely from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. He knew I saw right through the camouflage. Before anyone could suck in a breath to scream at me, the heavy brass knocker on the front door slammed 3 times. Hard, bang, bang, bang. It was not a polite knock. It was the heavy, authoritative pounding of someone who kicks in doors for a living. The heavy oak door swung open before anyone could reach the handle. Happy Thanksgiving, you miserable bastards! Master Chief Mason Hale barged into the hallway. He was built like a cinder block. Broad chest, thick neck, a messy graying beard that regulations would never allow but retirement did. He hauled a cheap cardboard 6-pack of craft IPAs in his left hand. The guy practically smelled like gun oil and old leather. He did not wait for an invitation. He bypassed Zach, completely ignoring the nervous twitch in my brother's jaw, and marched straight into the dining room. Mason spotted Roland at the head of the table. He threw the 6-pack onto the good lace tablecloth and delivered a heavy open-handed slap to Roland's shoulder. Smack. It sounded like a baseball hitting a catcher's mitt. Good to see you breathing, old man. Mason boomed, his voice echoing off the cheap drywall. He cracked open a warm beer without asking. He took a long pull, wiped foam from his mustache, and looked around the room. I was just telling the boys down at the VFW about that dust-up in Mogadishu. The time we got pinned by those technicals. He paused, shaking his head with genuine reverence. God, I still think about that close air support. F/A-18 came down right through the flak. Saved our asses. Did you ever track down that pilot, Roland? The one with the crazy call sign? What was it again? The oxygen left the room. It was absolute suffocating dead air. The kind of silence that happens right before an IED detonates. At the far end of the table, Evelyn's surgically tight forehead creased into a deep, ugly frown. She had no idea what Mason was talking about, but she hated anything that took the spotlight off her perfectly staged holiday. Roland froze. His hand halfway to his mouth with a piece of dry turkey stopped midair. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. His fingers suddenly went limp. Clatter. The heavy silver fork slipped from his grip. It hit the porcelain plate, the sharp metallic noise slicing through the quiet room like a razor blade. I did not move. I did not look away. I sat in my chair, picked up a piece of meat with my own fork, and took a slow, deliberate bite. I chewed. I swallowed. My eyes stayed locked dead onto Roland's chest, watching his breathing turn rapid and shallow. He was suffocating on his own lies. He looked at Mason, then darted a terrified, pathetic glance at me. No, Mason, Roland rasped. His throat was completely dry. Never found out who it was. Classified. Mason snorted, completely oblivious to the psychological standoff happening 3 feet away. Damn shame. Whoever that crazy son of a bitch was, they deserve a medal. Anyway, I gotta hit my sister's place. Catch you later, Commander. Mason walked out just as loudly as he walked in. The heavy door slammed shut. The silence rushed back in heavier this time. Nobody spoke. Zach shoved a handful of mashed potatoes into his mouth, his eyes darting nervously between Roland and me. He did not know the truth, but he could smell the fear rolling off his uncle. And Zach hated being left out of the loop. 10 minutes later, the tense dinner finally broke apart. People scattered to the living room to hide behind the noise of the TV. I stood in the narrow hallway, slipping my arms into my leather jacket. That was when I felt a small, hesitant tug on my sleeve. I looked down. Evan, Zach's 8-year-old son. He was holding a plastic toy soldier staring up at me with wide, innocent brown eyes. He had the same jawline as his father, but none of the arrogance. Not yet. Aunt Michelle, Evan whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder toward the living room. You are in the Navy, right? Like Grandpa Roland. I dropped down onto one knee. I leveled my eyes with his. Yes, Evan. I fly jets for the Navy. The kid's eyes lit up for a fraction of a second. Do you think you are as brave as that pilot Uncle Mason was talking about? The one who saved the men? Before I could even open my mouth, a heavy hand clamped down on Evan's small shoulder and yanked him backward. Zach. He stood over us, his face flushed an angry, blotchy red. The smell of cheap beer and desperation wafted off him. He yanked Evan behind his leg, shielding the boy from me like I was a disease. Stop bothering your aunt with stupid questions, Ev. Zach snapped. His voice was harsh, cruel. She does not fly anywhere dangerous. She types on a computer all day. She's just a clerk. Do not go comparing her to real heroes. Zach glared down at me. He was projecting, shoving all of his own pathetic inadequacy onto me, using his own son as a shield. Go play in the yard. We do not talk about her job in this house. Evan flinched. The light died in his eyes. He looked down at his dirty sneakers and mumbled an apology before scurrying away. I stayed down on one knee. I watched the kid disappear around the corner. My brother was not just stealing my money. He was actively poisoning the next generation. He was making sure that little boy grew up believing a lie just to protect his own fragile fake masculinity. I stood up, slowly. I did not look at Zach. I did not need to. I reached into the inside pocket of my leather jacket. My fingers traced the cold, hard edges of the small metal pin I always carried, a gold Navy pilot wing. I pulled it out. I stepped past Zach, intentionally clipping his shoulder with mine, hard enough to make him stumble back a half step. I walked straight into the living room, where Evan was sitting alone on the carpet staring blankly at the TV. I crouched down next to him. I took his small hand and pressed the heavy gold wings into his palm. I closed his fingers over it. Listen to me, Evan, I said, keeping my voice low. There are people in this world who carry their medals in their hearts, and there are cowards who only know how to wear them on their mouths. I stood up and looked straight over the boy's head. straight into the hallway where Zach was standing, his face twisted in pale, impotent rage. You will figure out who is who very soon. 3 years. That is exactly 36 months of radio silence from my mother, broken only by a stiff paper invitation arriving in my mailbox. The rented banquet hall at the local VFW smelled like stale draft beer, heavy floor wax, and overcooked prime rib. It was Roland's 60th birthday. They went all out. They invited half the county. The room was packed with dozens of retired military guys wearing their old unit hats, local business owners, and neighbors who only knew the fake polished version of the Butler family. I sat near the head table. I wore my dress whites, crisp, spotless, ironed with military precision. The heavy fabric rested on my shoulders, a physical reminder of the oath I took. Clink, clink, clink. A heavy silver butter knife tapped against a cheap wine glass. The low rumbling murmur of the crowded room slowly died out. Evelyn stood at the front of the room, gripping a microphone stand. She wore a heavy black dress, her face plastered in thick, expensive makeup to hide the years of deep-seated bitterness. She dabbed at the corner of her dry eyes with a white tissue, playing the crowd, building the narrative. We are all so incredibly proud of Roland, she crooned. Her voice echoed off the cheap acoustic ceiling tiles dripping with artificial sweetness. And we are so blessed to have a family dedicated to service. Just look at my son, Zach. She pointed at him. Zach stood up from his chair. He puffed out his chest wearing a wrinkled, ill-fitting gray suit that looked like he slept in it. Zach has been running his survival training company, helping our brave veterans transition back to civilian life. Evelyn continued, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. But it is hard work. It requires funding. The government ignores our boys, but this family does not. She turned her head. Her eyes locked dead onto me. The fake smile dropped for a fraction of a second, revealing the cold, calculating shark underneath. That is why tonight my daughter Michelle is going to make a special contribution. A full transfer of her military hazard pay trust to ensure her brother can keep helping real heroes. The applause started, slow at first, then rolling loudly through the banquet hall. 50 pairs of eyes shifted from the podium to me. A public ambush? An emotional hostage situation? I looked down at the table. Sitting right on top of my dinner plate, shoved between a dull steak knife and a piece of dry bread, was a legal document. A financial transfer agreement. They had planned this down to the absolute minute. Bring me into a room full of combat veterans, put a microphone in my face, and weaponize the crowd. Sign the paper and hand over the money I bled for. Or look like the most selfish, ungrateful daughter on the entire planet. The applause eventually faded into a heavy, expectant silence. The air in the room grew thick. I did not shift in my chair. I did not blink. I kept my breathing slow and regulated. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out. The tactical breathing of a fighter pilot locked in a dogfight. My right hand rested flat on the white tablecloth. My index finger tapped against the heavy fabric. A hard, rhythmic beat. Dash, dot, dash, dash, dot. TARGET. Dot, dash, dot, dot, dash, 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 LOCKED. Zach stepped out from behind the head table. He walked over to me holding a cheap plastic ballpoint pen. He had the nerve to look smug. He thought he finally had me cornered. He thought the uniform I wore was just a costume, a piece of fabric I used to hide behind a desk while real men did the heavy lifting. He stopped at my side, planting his hands on the table and leaning in close. I could smell the sharp tang of cheap whiskey on his breath. Go ahead and sign it, little sister, Zach muttered. He kept his voice just low enough so the microphones would not pick it up, but the people sitting at our table could hear every word. You never see combat anyway. What do you need hazard pay for paper cuts? Let me take that money and do something actually useful for society. Put your name on the line. He shoved the pen toward my chest. Evelyn watched from the podium, her arms crossed in triumph. Roland sat next to her, staring down at his empty plate, completely refusing to make eye contact with me. The great Navy SEAL hiding in the shadows, while the wolves tore his knees apart for spare change. I reached out. I took the plastic pen from Zach's sweaty hand. Zach smirked, straightening his crooked tie. He thought I folded. He thought the sheer pressure of the crowd finally broke my spine. I held the pen in both hands. I did not look at the contract. I looked dead into Zach's hollow eyes. I applied pressure. Snap. The sharp, violent crack of the hard plastic breaking in two echoed like a gunshot in the dead silent room. Black ink splattered across the crisp white document on my plate, ruining the paper. Zach flinched hard, taking a fast, clumsy step backward. I pushed my chair back. The metal legs scraped violently against the linoleum floor. I stood up to my full height. The sharp, immaculate creases of my dress whites stood in stark contrast to his sloppy civilian clothes. The gold oak leaf on my collar caught the harsh overhead lights flashing like a warning beacon. I know exactly how suffocating it feels when your own family tries to trap you, using guilt and public pressure to steal what you worked so hard to build. If you have ever had to look a toxic relative in the eye and say, no, to protect your own sanity, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment the word agree down below. Let me know I am not standing in this room alone. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to scream to command the space. I spoke from the chest, projecting my voice so every single veteran in that banquet hall could hear the cold, rusted iron in my tone. You want to talk about the battlefield? Evelyn let out a sharp, theatrical gasp. She grabbed the edge of the wooden podium, her knuckles turning bone white. The microphone fed back, letting out a high-pitched squeal that made half the room wince. Michelle! Evelyn hissed, completely dropping her loving mother facade. The venom was raw and unfiltered now. How dare you embarrass this family, disrespect your brother in front of these men? I did not flinch. I did not even look at her. From the middle of the crowded room, a heavy chair scraped loudly against the floor. An older guy, thick around the middle and wearing a faded Army Ranger's hat, stood up. His face was flushed red. He smelled heavily of cheap scotch and stale cigar smoke. One of Zach's drinking buddies brought in to pad the room with fake military credibility. He pointed a thick, calloused finger at me. Hey sister, what is your problem? The guy slurred slightly, leaning his weight against his table. The kid is just trying to do some good for the boys coming home. What do you do, huh? Fly a desk? Sit in an air-conditioned room staring at a radar screen? You act like you own the damn sky. What is your call sign anyway? Paper wings. A few guys at his table chuckled. It was a low, guttural sound. The sound of old men underestimating someone they thought they could easily bully. I ignored the drunk. I ignored Evelyn's heavy, angry breathing. I ignored Zach, who was standing there with that smug, pathetic smirk plastered across his face. I stepped away from the table. My boots clicked sharply against the hard linoleum floor. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. I moved out into the open space between the head table and the crowd. I was not retreating. I was taking the high ground, claiming the battlefield. I completely locked my eyes onto Roland. He was sitting rigidly at the head table. His face was pale. The overhead lights caught the heavy sweat beading on his forehead. Both of his hands were gripping the armrests of his chair so hard his forearms shook. He knew exactly what was about to happen. He knew the absolute hellfire I was holding back. And he knew he had zero cover. Zach let out a short, arrogant laugh. He leaned against the edge of the table, crossing his arms over his wrinkled suit jacket. He looked around the room, making eye contact with his buddies, soaking in the attention. He was waiting for the punchline. He was waiting for me to say something bureaucratic and weak so he could tear it down and play the alpha male. Evelyn mirrored him. She crossed her arms, lifting her chin. She actually smiled. A tight, victorious little smirk. In her warped mind, she thought she had won. She thought she had successfully cornered me in a room full of combat veterans, exposing me as a fraud who refused to help her own blood. They thought they controlled the narrative. They thought the uniform I wore was just for show. I kept my eyes pinned entirely on Roland. I stopped walking. I stood perfectly still, my shoulders squared, my posture flawless. I did not yell over the murmurs. I dropped my voice. I spoke from the chest, letting the deep, cold, metallic resonance carry through the sudden quiet of the banquet hall. Revenant 1. The words did not echo. They dropped like heavy lead weights onto the floor. It took exactly 2 seconds for the shockwave to hit. The low hum of conversation did not just stop, it was violently suffocated. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop instantly. It was the heavy, suffocating silence right before a bomb goes off. The drunk guy in the ranger's hat froze. The smirk was wiped clean off his face. His mouth hung open slightly. The cheap, half-smoked cigar slipped from his thick fingers. Thud. It hit the carpet. He did not even look down to pick it up. His eyes, suddenly completely sober, were wide and staring right at me. The other veterans in the room stiffened. Backs went rigid. Shoulders squared. The name meant nothing to Evelyn. It meant nothing to Zach. To them, it was just two random words. But to the men in this room who had actually worn boots in the sand, who had monitored classified comms, who knew the legends of the sky, it meant everything. It was the call sign of a ghost. The pilot who dove a $50 million fighter jet into a wall of anti-aircraft fire over Mogadishu, violating protocol, dropping ordnance so close to friendly forces, it practically melted their armor just to drag a pinned-down SEAL team out of hell. The silence stretched. It was agonizing. Zach looked around, his smug smile faltering. He noticed the sudden change in the room. He saw the drunk guy staring at me with pure terror. He saw the other veterans sitting up, their expressions shifting from boredom to absolute awe. He could feel the power completely slipping out of his hands, but he was too stupid to understand why. What the hell does that mean? Zach stammered, his voice cracking slightly. He looked at Roland for help. I did not answer him. I kept my eyes locked on the old SEAL. Roland's chest heaved. He closed his eyes. The lie he had protected for years was dead. The drunk guy in the ranger's hat finally found his voice. It cracked. You were the fast mover over Mogadishu. He stammered, looking from me to the head table, completely ignoring the cigar burning a hole in the cheap carpet. No way. That pilot is a legend. That is classified Tier 1 Overwatch. There is no way. Crash! The heavy padded banquet chair at the head table flipped violently backward. It slammed against the drywall. Roland was on his feet. He did not look like a tired, retired old man anymore. The broad shoulders squared up. The chest expanded. 10 years of suffocating guilt and cowardice evaporated in a single explosive breath. The Navy SEAL. Commander, the man who had ordered men to kill and die in the darkest corners of the earth, finally stepped out of the shadows. It is the damn truth, Roland roared. His voice did not just fill the room. It shattered it. It was a guttural, booming thunderclap that rattled the cheap glassware on every table. Zach physically flinched. He stumbled backward, his shiny dress shoes slipping on the linoleum. He caught himself against the edge of my table, knocking over a water pitcher. The ice spilled everywhere. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified child wearing an oversized suit. Evelyn completely froze. Her mouth hung open. Her fingers, which had been clutching a heavy crystal glass of red wine, suddenly went numb. Smash! The glass hit the floor. It exploded. Thick, dark red wine splattered across the scuffed linoleum, splashing up onto the hem of her expensive black dress. It looked exactly like fresh blood. She did not even notice. Her eyes darted frantically around the room, watching the empire of lies she had spent 30 years building collapse in real time. She watched as the drunk guy in the ranger's hat stood up straight, his spine snapping into rigid alignment. She watched as every single veteran in that banquet hall, dozens of them men who had previously been laughing, drinking, and eating, pushed their chairs back. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was a synchronized automatic response. Muscle memory drilled into them from boot camp. When a decorated combat veteran, a living legend of the sky, is identified in the room, you do not sit. You stand. Dozens of men stood at absolute attention. Total silence, no clapping, no cheering. Just the heavy, profound respect of men who knew the cost of war. Evelyn was staring at a room full of people worshipping the very daughter she had just tried to publicly humiliate. She had thrown away a diamond to protect a piece of trash. And now everyone knew it. Roland did not look at the crowd. He marched around the head table. His heavy boots thudded against the floor. He walked straight toward Zach. Zach held his hands up, palms out, a pathetic gesture of surrender. Uncle Roland? Wait, I did not know. Roland grabbed Zach by the lapels of his wrinkled suit jacket. He did not punch him. He did not need to. The sheer physical dominance was enough. He practically lifted the 30-year-old man off his feet, pulling him so close their noses almost touched. "You want her hazard pay?" Roland snarled, his voice a low, terrifying growl that carried to every corner of the dead silent room. "You want the money she earned, flying through a wall of heavy anti-aircraft fire to save my life, to save the lives of an entire SEAL team." Zach whimpered, an actual audible whimper. Roland shoved him backward. Zach hit the table hard, knocking the ruined, ink-stained power of attorney onto the floor. "You are a leech!" Roland spat, pointing a thick-scarred finger right between Zach's eyes. "You play dress-up on the weekends. You run a fake company. You steal valor from the people who actually bleed for this country. You are a fraud, Zach. And you disgust me." The mask was gone. The alpha male survival expert was exposed as nothing more than a broke, terrified grifter. In front of his friends, in front of his family, in front of the veterans he claimed to help. Zach slid down the edge of the table, staring at the floor, completely humiliated. Evelyn tried to speak. She opened her mouth, reaching a hand out toward Roland. "Roland, please, he is just a boy." "Shut your mouth, Evelyn." Roland snapped, not even looking at her. The harsh command cut her off instantly. She shrank back against the podium, looking small, old, and utterly defeated. Roland turned slowly. He faced me. The anger bled out of his face, replaced by a heavy, profound exhaustion. He looked at the crisp white uniform I wore. He looked at the gold oak leaf on my collar. Then he reached into the breast pocket of his blazer. He pulled out a heavy, solid brass challenge coin. The trident, the emblem of the Navy SEALs, the personal coin of a team commander. It was not something you bought. It was something you earned with blood. He took 3 steps toward me. Then in front of the entire room, the great Colonel Roland Butler stopped. He bowed his head. A slow, deep, deliberate nod of absolute submission and respect. He held his hand out, palm up. The brass coin caught the light. "I have been a coward for 10 years, Michelle," Roland said. His voice was no longer booming. It was quiet, broken. "I protected a lie because I was afraid of the fallout. I let them treat you like dirt while you carried the honor of this entire family on your back." I did not move. I watched his hand tremble slightly as he held the coin out. "I owe you my life," Roland whispered, staring at the brass in his palm. "And this family does not deserve you." The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the cheap refrigerator behind the bar. I looked at Zach cowering against the table. I looked at Evelyn staring at her ruined dress. Then I looked down at the brass coin. I reached out. My fingers brushed against Roland's rough, calloused hand. I took the coin. The metal was warm, heavy, solid. It felt like the truth. I slipped the coin into my pocket. I did not say thank you. I did not offer forgiveness. Forgiveness is for people who make mistakes. They made a choice. I turned around. I walked toward the heavy double doors at the back of the banquet hall. My boots crunched down hard on the crisp white power of attorney lying in the middle of the floor, leaving a black muddy footprint right over my brother's name. I pushed the doors open and walked out into the cold night. I did not look in the rearview mirror. The heavy double wooden doors of the VFW hall swung shut behind me, cutting off the dead silence of the banquet room. The November air hit my face, cold, sharp. It smelled like exhaust fumes and wet asphalt. I climbed into the cab of my truck. The heavy steel door slammed shut, a solid mechanical thud. I turned the key. The V8 engine roared to life, shaking the floorboards. I put it in drive. I left the parking lot without spinning the tires. No theatrics, no dramatic exits, just a clean tactical brake. 10 miles down the highway, the adrenaline finally started to bleed out of my system. My knuckles were pale against the thick leather steering wheel. I pulled off the road at a deserted Chevron station. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered, buzzing with a cheap electrical hum. The concrete island was stained with black motor oil and dried dirt. I put the truck in park, but left the engine running. I reached into my back pocket. I pulled out my leather wallet. Inside, tucked firmly behind my military identification card, was a photograph. The only one I kept, 10 years old. Evelyn, Zach, and me standing on a front porch. They were smiling. I was in my dress uniform. I looked at the glossy paper under the harsh neon light. It felt incredibly heavy. I grabbed the edge of the photograph. Rip! The sound was loud in the quiet cab. I tore it exactly in half, straight down the middle, physically separating the uniform from the fake smiles. Then I stacked the two pieces together and tore them again. 4 pieces. I rolled down my window. I tossed the torn scraps right into the rusted metal trash can next to the gas pump. Gone. Dead weight dropped. Before I could roll the window back up, headlights flooded my cab. Blinding high-beam halogen lights cut through the dark. Tires screeched violently against the dirty concrete. A heavy Ford F-25 angled right across my front bumper, completely blocking my exit. The driver's side door of the truck groaned open. Heavy boots hit the pavement. Roland. He did not look angry. He looked broken. He walked slowly toward my open window, his broad shoulders slouched under his dark blazer. He stopped a foot away from the door. The harsh neon light from the gas station canopy cast deep, ugly shadows across his sagging face. He did not try to offer a fake apology. He reached inside his jacket. He pulled out a thick manila folder. The paper was yellowed at the edges, stained with old coffee rings and time. He passed it through the open window. I took it. It was heavy. I flipped open the cover. It was an after-action report. Mogadishu. The pages were heavily redacted. Thick black marker crossed out entire paragraphs of tactical movements. But my call sign was there, uncovered, printed in black ink, Revenant 1. It was the official military record he had buried to protect his nephew. A physical, undeniable confession of his own cowardice. He gave me the evidence of his treason. He handed over his own execution warrant. He stood there in the freezing cold, waiting for me to scream at him. Waiting for the firing squad. I dropped the yellowed folder onto the passenger seat. At that exact moment, the center console lit up. My phone screen flashed bright white in the dark cab. The vibration rattled aggressively against the hard plastic. A text message, then another. Then 5 more in rapid succession. The screen filled with walls of text. Evelyn. I did not pick up the phone. I just read the preview bubbles glowing in the dark. Michelle, please come back to the hall. People are talking. We need to fix this. Then the tone shifted. The manipulation kicked into high gear, the frantic scrambling of a cornered rat. It is all Zach's fault. He lied to me about his company. He manipulated my motherly love. You know how he is. He forced me to write that contract. I am the victim here. Please call your mother. I stared at the glowing screen. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a cold clinical disgust. 30 years of psychological abuse, and the exact moment her empire collapsed, she did not apologize. She threw her golden boy straight under the bus to save her own skin. Scapegoating. The ultimate survival tactic of a narcissist. The poison was so deep in her veins, it would never wash out. Even with a room full of combat veterans exposing her fraud, she still thought she could spin the narrative. She still thought she could pull the strings. I reached out. I picked up the phone. The glass felt cold against my thumb. I swiped open the contact list. Evelyn Butler. I pressed the small icon in the top right corner. The menu dropped down. A simple red line of text. Block caller. I pressed it. The screen prompted a confirmation. You will not receive phone calls, messages, or FaceTime from people on your block list. I hit confirm. I navigated back. I did the exact same thing for Zach. The screen went dark. The digital umbilical cord to my bloodline was severed. Permanently. I tossed the dead phone onto the dashboard. I looked back out the window. Roland was still standing there. The white exhaust from my truck curled around his legs in the cold air. He looked at the dark phone on the dash, then looked at me. He understood exactly what I just did. I kept the coin, I said. My voice was completely flat, empty. I stared right into his tired, hollow eyes. Because the coin represents the uniform, I accept the coin, but I do not accept this family. I rolled the window up. The glass sealed shut, cutting off the cold wind and the smell of the gas station. I dropped the gear shifter into reverse. The transmission clunked heavily. I backed up, swinging the front end of my truck completely clear of his blockade. I shifted into drive. My heavy boot pressed down hard on the gas pedal. The engine roared. I left the flickering neon lights in the rearview mirror, driving straight into the black void of the highway. Free. 3 years. That is exactly 1,095 days of clean air. A lot of concrete, jet fuel, and ocean between that dark highway and today. Naval Air Station Oceana. The late August sun beat down hard on the tarmac, baking the asphalt until the air physically shimmered in thick, wavy lines. The air smelled like salt water, hot rubber, and raw JP5 jet fuel. I stood at the center of the wooden reviewing stand. I wore my dress whites. The fabric was stiff, heavily starched, immaculate. A 4-star admiral stepped forward and firmly pinned the distinguished flying cross to my chest. The heavy brass and ribbon dug a little into the fabric. I looked out at the front row of VIP folding chairs. One seat was conspicuously empty. Evelyn was not there. She was exactly where she belonged, locked inside her 4-wall suburban prison, drowning in the massive financial fallout her golden boy dropped in her lap before his fake company folded. She had isolated herself completely. The blinds in her house were always drawn tight. She was too ashamed to show her face at the local grocery store, too bitter to admit she had backed the wrong horse and alienated the only person who actually paid her bills. Total, absolute radio silence. For a narcissist who fed off public attention and neighborhood gossip, isolation was the ultimate death sentence. She was a ghost haunting her own living room. The PA system cracked with a sharp burst of static. The master of ceremonies leaned into the microphone. His voice echoed heavily off the corrugated steel of the aircraft hangars. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action, flying under the classified call sign Revenant 1. He did not even get to finish the sentence. Down in the front row, Roland moved. He was not hunched over. He was not hiding. He stood up. Behind him, 3 entire rows of retired Navy SEALs, broad-shouldered, gray-haired men wearing gold tridents on their suit lapels, moved in perfect unison. Snap. Heavy leather dress shoes cracked against the hot concrete. Backs went rigid. Chins leveled. Every single one of them raised a flat, razor-sharp hand to the brim of their covers. A unified, flawless military salute. The crowd of civilians sitting behind them went completely unnervingly silent. You could hear the coastal wind whipping the halyard ropes against the metal flagpoles. No polite clapping, no cheering, just the heavy, suffocating weight of absolute respect. I looked down at Roland. He held his salute, his jaw locked tight, looking me dead in the eye. He was finally standing in the light. He was finally a soldier again. I did not break my bearing. I kept my eyes level. But my peripheral vision tracked past the VIP section, scanning the edge of the rusted chain link fence near the maintenance hangars. I found him. Zach. He was not wearing his pristine ironed woodland camouflage. He was wearing heavy dark blue mechanic coveralls. The thick fabric was stained pitch black with old grease and corrosive hydraulic fluid. His hands, gripping a dirty shop rag, were filthy and blistered. His Alpha Survival Empire went belly up the exact second Roland stopped running interference for him. The bank took the leased trucks. The IRS took the rest. Now he was turning wrenches as a bottom-tier civilian contractor, wiping grease off landing gear struts for minimum wage just to pay off the loan sharks he still owed. He stood by a rusted metal tool cart. Our eyes met across the massive expanse of the tarmac. He did not puff out his chest. He did not smirk. He did not try to project that fake, toxic alpha male dominance. His shoulders slumped forward. He broke eye contact almost immediately, looking down at his oil-stained steel toe boots. Completely stripped of his fake masculinity. Total, absolute submission. The ceremony officially dismissed. The crowd broke into a low, buzzing hum of conversation. I walked down the wooden steps of the reviewing stand, the heavy metal clinking softly against my chest. Before the brass and the politicians could crowd me, a small kid broke through the line of crisp dress uniforms. Evan. He was 11 years old now, taller, lanky. He stopped a few feet away, hesitating, staring wide-eyed at the metal on my uniform. I did not shake his hand. I dropped down on one knee. The black asphalt was burning hot through the fabric of my trousers, but I did not care. I leveled my eyes with his. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy brass Seal Challenge coin Roland had given me 3 years ago. I reached out, took Evan's hand, and pressed the cold metal into his palm. I closed his small fingers tightly over the trident. Aunt Michelle. Evan started, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. I cut him off, not with anger, but with absolute conviction. Listen to me, Evan, I said, keeping my voice steady and low. Do not ever let anyone force you to stay silent about the truth. Do not ever shrink yourself down just to make a coward feel taller, not even if they share your blood. I stood up to my full height. At that exact second, the concrete ground under my boots started to shake. A deep, bone-rattling vibration bled through the soles of my shoes. I looked up. A flight of 4 F-35 Lightning jets tore the clear blue sky wide open in a tight diamond formation. The deafening, violent roar of the afterburners drowned out every single voice on the ground. The sky did not belong to the cowards hiding behind the kitchen table. It belonged to the people who steered straight into the storm. Real forgiveness is not about tolerating the wrong done to you. It is about taking a knife, cutting the toxic roots dead, and walking forward with your spine straight. If you have ever had to stand up, set a hard boundary, and protect your own worth from the people who were supposed to love you, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share a time you fought back in the comments below. Let me know I am not flying solo.